Okay, so we are live on YouTube.
All right.
We can jump it off.
Of course, as always, Hotel family, peace and blessings to all those who have joined us. Of course, we are Melaneyes Media. My name is Baba Aundar, my aunt. And of course, here with my brother, my friend, my business partner, Brother Born Logic Allah. I don't know, I'm so used to our Sunday, procedure and structure. I think that's how I just feel comfortable starting off, brother. But, of course, family, this is Melaneyes Conversation. We're just coming to you live on Tuesday mornings, where we just want to have some general conversations. And in some way, this is the kind of thing that Brother Logic and I talk about, not only on Sundays and during our presentations, but just in general. This is the conversation we have, trying to look at every aspect of our existence and trying to better understand ourselves and us as a people, and understand our current situation and condition, and always trying to figure out, of course, solutions to everything that involves us. So, brother, I just want to let you kind of, because I know you had, of course, shared an idea, a concept that you thought would be very interesting, kind of just to talk about. And I know we've talked about, in a way in the past, but if you would like just kind of open us up to this idea of language.
Absolutely. Well, peace and greetings, family. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, my name is Born Logic Allah, co-founder of Melaneyes Media. Like Baba Aundar said, we just really want to open the floor for these Tuesday conversations. And one thing we thought about having a conversation about, I'm going to do a quick screen share, is language. And so when we think about language, first off, we want to define everything that we talk about, make sure that we have a proper definition. But language is the communication of thoughts and feelings through a system of arbitrary signals, such as voice sounds, gestures, or written symbols. Such a system including its rules for combining its components, such as words. And when we really just talk about that, the thing that jumped out at me, Baba Aundar, is that it's a communication of thoughts.
Yes.
It's how we really communicate our thoughts. And so when we think about language, often we think about the verbal language, but there are other means and methods by which we communicate thought. And so for us as a people, as Black people, especially here in North America, the language that has been used for and against us, the language that we use, we have to always be cognizant of the words and how we communicate thoughts. And the first thing I wanted to say is it's really important to make sure the thoughts that you're communicating are your own, because you really don't want to be communicating somebody else's thoughts. You don't want to be transferring a message from somebody else. But I wanted to kind of get your take on language in general.
Well, and just in that opening, brother, first of all, just to take off where you just ended there, the thoughts of others. And I think a lot of our communication is the thoughts of others. I mean, of course, the language, first of all, the idea of communication and just being able to communicate ideas, thoughts, and share it with each other, And of course, as you just highlighted in the defining language, of course, that could be through the oral, written, or gestures. But the idea is the ideas that we're communicating. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, I remember when we was doing the presentation mental side, and Dr. Amos Wilson was speaking of language, and he just basically said the language we use is a slave language. Now, that can go a lot of different ways when you look into it and look at it, but it speaks to what you just said, brother, is that what ideas are we transmitting? What thoughts are we communicating with each other? And is it thoughts of liberation? Because thoughts of liberation requires a liberating language. And of course, through our experience here in America, we have been engulfed in this, in a way, a slave language when it comes to us as a people. So I think this is a great topic in the sense of trying to understand how we use language, the language that we are using, because we speak English. I mean, I don't know any other language other than English, and I'm working on that myself. But the idea is that, can we use English, the English language, as a liberating language? I believe we can, and we're going to have to. But it goes back again to say that, what thoughts are we communicating? Because if we have, I'm going to call them slave thoughts, just for keep it simple. The idea, if we have those kind of thoughts, that's the kind of the language we use are going to transmit those thoughts. Mm-hmm. So, just this idea of communicating thoughts, I think we got to be first conscious of liberating thoughts that's going to free us, thoughts that are going to empower us, and then we'll use the appropriate language.
Absolutely. I truly agree with that. And, the thing I think about is that we as a people, once again, just re-emphasizing the fact that we are the original people, we mastered communication and the transference of thoughts through many different systems along the way of our growth and development. And so that's something we really have to keep in mind, that we have mastered language, and we have to just tap into that history and also our presence, because that's an ability we have.
And I agree. And I think if we look at it like that, because true enough, we are the originators of the language, of that idea of being able to transmit thought. And of course, when you think about coming up with a language, some way to communicate with others, one thing I've definitely that captured my attention and really gave me something to really reflect on was that in the ancient Egyptian or Kemet, they talked about Melaneyes, the divine language. And I thought it was very interesting, because I heard one of our great scholars say that, you master the language, but in mastering the language, really you was mastering your thoughts, and you was transmitting thoughts through your spoken word or written word to empower, to educate, to inform, to transfer thoughts from history of the past to the present, and of course, give direction in the future. But the main thing, it was a divine language. And when you think of divine language, you think of the original people as you bring forth and talk about when it comes to us. So I asked myself, what language are we speaking now? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Is this a divine language that we're speaking? And if it's not a divine language, how do we get back to a divine language? Mm-hmm. And again, I think it goes back to first, and the last thing on this is just the idea of that it's the thought, speech, and behavior. Because in the traditional writings, they would say that's the alignment. Your thought, speech, and behavior becomes one. And that's what truly gives you the power to communicate with authority. Mm-hmm. So just the idea, do our thoughts, speech, and behavior align?
Indeed. I think, and I'm going to take away the screen share, so we just come back. But, one thing I think about, just once again in my teachings culturally, we're taught that the universal language is mathematics. And the way of mathematics is positive progression. So I say all that to say that when we speak positively, regardless of the dialect, everything in the universe accepts and responds to it in that way. And I'll give an example scientifically. As growing up, my mom would always say, you want your plants to grow, you got to talk to them. But it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Yes. And so that the delivery is also a part of our language. And so if our delivery is sincere and positive, everything within the whole universe responds and accepts and understands that. And I think that goes back to just the core, the essence of who we are as human beings, but as a living being, but also then to us as a people. As long as we start off with the positive, I think we'll be in the right direction. We'll be in a good, orderly direction. And then everything that we say will come about in an understanding. And so with that being said, I think about, once again, how we greet one another. I know come on, we say peace and we say I share, we give each other's welcome, family, things that are positive in nature. And that welcomes and that resonates, I think, throughout the whole interaction that we have with people. So just upon greeting one another, I think if it's from a positive vein, that's a good place to start.
I wholeheartedly agree, brother. And I think that's very powerful. First of all, just to say what you just mentioned, brother, just the positivity in our speech, which, you know, a lot of times is the energy that we transmit, even before we speak orally or verbally. Even in our writings, we can sometimes detect that. But I think it's just powerful to have that thought, first of all, when we greet each other, to greet each other in a respectful way, a peaceful way, an open and honest way. And I think, you know, that's the first sense of true communication. And I know, as you just said, brother, we make a effort acknowledging that. But I say this, you know, and I was thinking about this this morning, you know, at one time, I thought it was just so empowering, is that we greeted each other as brothers and sisters. Hey, how you doing, brother? Or how you doing, sister? And looking at history, specifically around the 60s, it seemed to have been a point of emphasis, making sure that we greeted each other in a positive and respectful way. And I know we was doing it before that time, you know, because we would say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, how you doing today, miss so-and-so? How you doing today, sir? But it was just that positive energy that we was transmitting in our greetings of each other. And you know, and sometimes I'm definitely saddened by how we greet each other today, because I think sometimes it's not in using the best language to transmit the positive ideas and thoughts. And again, it goes back to say that we have to be thinking positive of each other to transmit or speak positively to each other.
Indeed. So what you just said, the one thing that I just grasped from what you just said, it really come back to the thoughts. Because if we're not thinking about ourselves and one another in a positive light, then our communication, our words is definitely not going to reflect that. And so really it starts with the mentality.
Yes.
And one thing I was thinking about, you know, I often use the term original people because I think it's important. We, as Black people, we are the original people. We know that the oldest human remains have been discovered in Africa. We know that that is the root of civilization, and we are the root of civilization. And if we look at it in that term, I always was of the thinking that using it in our language reminds us of that. It's a way to teach, because I was also taught when you talking, you teaching. If you listening, you learning. And so then if I'm speaking, I'm striving to convey a message that, hey, whether you know it or not, we are the origin of all, because original really can be broken down into origin of all. And when we realize that, that's powerful just in itself, just the acknowledging that we are first. And so much comes along with that. Like, you know, we were talking about language, the sciences. That means that all of the first everything came from us in all reality, because as the mothers and fathers of civilization, just to be able to ensure that the species could survive, you needed language, you needed sciences, you needed mathematics, you needed gardening and farming and things of these natures. So all of these things originated with us. And so just that term, original man or original woman.
No. And it just made me think about, you know, this idea of how they say in the beginning was the word. And it was just the fact that it was that thought, because many times before we even transmit this sound, these words are releasing from our mouths, it's a thought. We're talking to ourselves in our head, you know, we're having this conversation within us. But the idea is that, again, it goes back to this, to me, a positive thought within us. Because, you know, when you think positive of yourself, you think good of yourself, especially if you're doing good. And then it lifts you up, it gives you energy, it gives you power, and then you're transmitting that, you know, because they say now, you know, it's this thing to say hurt people hurt other people. But the idea on the other end, good people transmit good ideas and uplift the positive things in other people. But it's done through the language that we speak, you know. but it begins with the language that we have within ourselves. So I think when you talk about the original people, and I know you probably have heard this before, where we were born to think right. It's just natural. We were born to think right and to do right. And of course, I think part of that alignment is that we was born to speak right, meaning that we was born to use language that transmit the positive things of ourselves, of nature. And of course, I would say, and family, that's not to say that we just negate or deny that there are some things that are not positive. We speak of those things because we have to speak of truth and reality. But the fact is, when we're talking about the language, even in that case, we can say things in a way that still empowers us.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. You know, I was reading an article because I know I would just bring this up because this is something I was thinking about last night. The term Black Lives Matter. Okay. Now, I was reading an article because they was basically saying that one of the founders had swindled some money or allegedly. And it made me just think about the movement in general. And one of the things that I know I personally have been critical of is the title of it. And I know a lot of the young people adapted to it and embraced it. But me, myself, I never fully embraced it because I felt like it was from a weakened point. And what I mean by that is, of course, Black Lives Matter. That's like the bare minimum. But if you go back to our ancestors, if you look at the civil rights movement or coming, people were using terms like Black Power movement. That's power. That's strength in that statement. And they had powerful symbolic gestures, which we know once again is language. The wearing of the hair in its natural state, extruded from the head, the afro, the black fist, a black glove. I mean, those are powerful and could be interpreted as intimidating statements.
Wow.
And it made me think about, you know, the brothers on the, John Carlos and the brothers standing when they won the Olympic gold, how that was such a bold statement and they said no words. But the emphasis on the Blackness and the power of it transmitted and reverberated around the world. And so I think that when we choose movements, we have to, one, understand our language. What are we actually transmitting and saying and conveying in the titling, in the words that we're so in the language. So things, I know t-shirts have been written with I can't breathe and things of that nature. But once again, that's from the negative. That's from the hoping and asking perspective as opposed to demanding and taking. And I think that we have to make sure, once again, that's why I think history is so important, so that we understand what our ancestors have gone through, understand some of the faults and some of the things that we can improve upon, but take that same torch and run with it.
That's a good point, brother. You know, and when you speak of that term of Black Lives Matter, I myself, I never really connected with the term and utilizing that, because what I see you saying, and that's what I think I felt also, is that it's almost like asking someone to see me as a person, to make me matter, to accept me as a human being. And I think that is quite different than what we were saying when we said Black is beautiful, Black is powerful, Black Power movement. And I think, again, that's the language. When going back to what I originally said when I talked about Dr. Amos Wilson talking about the slave language, many times I think we are not conscious of the language we're using, in the sense that we're not realizing that we have to use strong, positive, affirming language that affirms us first and foremost. And if people accept it or don't accept it, that's on them. But, the idea of power is, you have your reality and people are kind of forced to accept your reality as if it is their own. But the idea, I think, just the term Black, in the society we live in, and in a few minutes, I'd like for us, just because, it's one of the things we talk about is this idea of racism, white supremacy, and I want to just open that up for a minute. But before that, to say in this society, Black has been cast as a negative, as dismal, ugly, inferior. Of course, you know, you have black market, black ball, and all these terms. And of course, it's in the society we live in, it's shameful and disrespectful, because we have taken a color and made it a negative and let society define it that way, in a sense, define us that way. So too often we are struggling to redefine ourselves. But the problem in that is what I think you're acknowledging, is that we're asking someone else to redefine and see us different instead of seeing ourselves different. So basically around that, but I think the idea of using Black, and I think one of the things that we've always tried to encourage is that we use it in a positive, affirming, strong, acknowledgeable way of saying that, yeah, Black is beautiful, Black is strong, and this is why, in the sense of, you know, a black belt, a master of the martial arts, a blacksmith, a master of iron and steel. I mean, it's ways you can utilize the term, but just the fact of saying, you're a beautiful Black brother, or you're a beautiful Black sister, and letting our children know that, because in the society we live in, again, is that we're not looked at that way, but that's the way we must first look in the mirror and see ourselves. But it goes back to the language. We have to master the language. And when I say master the language, mainly we have to take control of the language and define it for who we are as a people.
Those are really good points. Going to the Black point, or just the term Black, there's been a study that is considered scarier for white America when people use the term Black as opposed to African American. There's more apprehension, and this is like a literal study that they did to kind of prove this point. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a jewel in that as well, though, because even though, going back to what you were saying, the terminology that's associated with Black is often negative, but I think because subconsciously what is also understood is that it's most dominant and most natural, because even the term, and just say hue is our skin pigmentation. Naturally, humans have hue and skin pigmentation, which go back to our origin. When we really look at and dissect Black as a scientific term, or just what it is scientifically, all throughout the universe, there exists darkness, dark matter. All throughout the universe exists Black. Which goes back to it being the essence of all things, because from darkness comes lightness and not the other way around. When we look at the depths of the soil, the richest soil is Black. When we look at the depths of the ocean, it's Black, it's darkness. And so even from an artistic standpoint, if you were to take all of the colors and mix them together, you could get Black. And so scientifically, it literally is the essence of all. And so if we understand that, then we can use that in our language to our advantage, understanding the power of not only the term Black, but the color itself, which really, once again, is really not a color, it's considered a hue. But just looking at things from a different perspective, sometimes I think can open up, once again, new ideas. New ideas and new ways to look at it. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity, because I know you mentioned the term white supremacy. I know that's something we talk about. So give me your view on that word and that term.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful and conscious of the terms we're using, because we can affirm something that is not true. And I say that because when we think of white supremacy, I know we're talking about it in the sense of racism, but it speaks almost to say white is superior. And I think we have to be careful of that, because the behavior that resonates from the idea of racism, so-called white supremacy, is a very negative behavior. And I don't think we should glorify a negative behavior. We should call it for what it really is. It's a malady, a madness, mayhem is something, but it's not the idea of supremacy if you're talking about us as human beings, to be human, to be civil, is not to think of yourself as superior and have a right to dominate, control, exploit, and even kill those that you see as inferior. So I think more, maybe if we're trying to really speak of this behavior, put it in the proper context of saying that maybe it's a white madness, it's a white mayhem, but put it in a way where we can see what it really, the results of it really is. And therefore, if, it's like when you're sick, you want to just acknowledge the fact that this is the sickness and this is how it makes you feel. And this is what it causes you, your physical being to be like. Likewise, I think that's the idea of what we have to correct in the sense of using the term, again, white supremacy, call it what it is and the results of it. So that's my thing is, because I think if we call it out, then we can challenge it to what it creates. Mm-hmm. And if we don't call it out and we continue to use the term that has been given in a way that we've been given and utilized, it continues to reinforce something that is a falsehood.
Right. And what you just said at the end, I think that's one thing that always resonated with me, is that it subconsciously, because we got to remember there's the conscious mind and then there's the subconscious mind, to continue to reiterate a statement sometimes subconsciously reinforces the statement. So if we say things like white supremacy, even though we're literally saying white is not supreme, but subconsciously it may be reinforcing that. And mostly because the society mirrors that language and it mirrors that ideal and that idea, even if when we speak it verbally, that's not what we're affirming. But going back to what you said about the affirmation, what we really need to do is focus on and I think Dr. Francis Cress Welsing just referred to it really as a mental illness. To think of a group of people to be supreme because of their characteristics, physical characteristics, and skin color is an abnormality. That's not normal, and that's an illness to think in that way. And then to project that onto others is once again an illness. And so if we start, now I don't know the best word or the best term, but I know that's not it. And so what we really have to do is, one, understand that, because you can't really make a change unless you're aware of something. And so with that, I just think that it's important to look at it from a different perspective. And I think one thing that you and I share in common is that over time of studying just us as a people and our struggle, you may look at things a little differently than the average person. And that's okay, because sooner or later, the world will start moving more towards what the righteous path is. And if we correct, then the world will start sounding and communicating more like us than the reverse. And so I just wanted to say that. Another term, and it's just me personally, I don't like to use the term race. I don't say black race, because the term race connotates competition, as if we're trying to get to a finish line. But when you look at life in a cyclical way, as it moves in cycles, in my terms of thinking is everlasting, it just transfers different shapes and forms and moves through different mediums, then it's not a race. Say black is the human family. And so there are different human families on the planet, just like a person from my particular family might have a certain eye color. I know actually in my family, the eyelashes is something that, my mom has, my brothers and sisters have, just certain things about a physical characteristic can be passed down to descendants or family members. And so skin color, in my opinion, is similar. So when we talk about people, rather than classify race, I use the term human family, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are all a part of the same human family. Whether it's different branches of that tree, is still from the same root. And once again, we are the root of that tree.
I appreciate that, brother, because again, it goes to how we conceptualize, how we see the world. And if we started seeing the world from a more humane perspective, then we can start speaking from that perspective. And I think, of course, that is one of our great challenges, is to see the world, to think of it in a different way, and then to speak it into existence. And I know, we're just talking about using the language, but ultimately the language is the really beginning of the transformation of our thinking and ultimately our behavior. So if we're thinking differently, others think differently, and then we all can get on accord of what it is to be human, part of the human family, then we can act accordingly. But it also brought up something else, and I know we've talked about this before on some of our presentations, and that's the idea of how we prefer to use the word enslaved African instead of slave. And I just like, people, because we've talked about it, but just to share your perspective on how you see that being utilized.
Indeed. Well, one thing, I think it was in the Black Cultural Impact class, one of the slides I start out with says, slavery was the condition of a people, not the definition of a people.
Yeah.
And I think that's, in my perspective, I think that's one of the best ways to look at it, because, and that's a problem for us in society. Often we tend to classify people by condition or situation. Well, he's a, or she's a teacher, or things. No, they're human beings, they're people. That's a position that they hold in society. But even that can change. And so the enslavement period was a time frame that we went through. It was a condition that we were put into, but it does not carry on with us. And we shouldn't refer to our ancestors, in my opinion, as slaves, because they were people, they were human beings. They were mothers, fathers, some of them kings and queens, in all honesty. However, they were put into a condition, but we shouldn't allow that condition to define them and give them their identity, because ultimately our identity is something so truly important and pure. And we got to make sure that we maintain that. Who we are and how we define and how we categorize ourselves should be of the highest, the utmost level of respect. And so when you first brought that to my attention, it really made me rethink things. And once again, that transference of that idea to me helped me change my language, which then in turn helped me change my thinking.
Now, I think that's very important, brother, because one of the things, when I was introduced to the concept and understanding of it, one of the things that it helped me to do, and hopefully it helps us to do, is that it reconnects us to our humanity. And I'm saying, when we talk about enslaved Africans, yes, I agree 100%, brother, that it's a condition, it's a situation that we are placed in, but it's not us. And I think it's important then that we use that to understand that the condition is separate from the fact that we are talking about Africans. And as you have said before, the original people, the original human beings on this earth, and understanding our humanity and understanding our heritage and our culture, because as a people, we are connected to an origin, a source, and a beginning. And I think that beginning, well, I don't think, but the beginning is truly the beginning of the human family. But the idea is that we have to make sure that we utilize the correct term in identifying our condition and our separate from our humanity. And I think that's why it resonated with me when I first heard the idea of utilizing enslaved African instead of slaves, because I know it's easy for us to say that, because too often that has been the image and picture we've been given of ourselves, as almost to say that if you go to a dictionary and they had a picture of a slave, they would have a picture of us. But we all know that others have been enslaved. But the fact is that we have to, once again, utilize a language that reclaims our humanity.
Absolutely. And those are good points. And I think that's kind of bringing us to probably our time.
Oh, that's right. Oh, man.
But a good conversation. I really enjoyed this today.
Yeah, it's been very insightful. But, what I always appreciate, brother, is that, I tell you, I think you're a great writer, brother. I think just in the language. But the idea is that mastering the language. And this is, again, go back to kind of where, I saw us starting with creating a liberating language. And again, that doesn't necessarily, now it'd be great that we learn Swahili or learn some African language, because it's over 2,000 languages spoken on the continent of Africa. That's a lot of languages. And of course, Swahili being the most predominant. But the idea is taking the language that we have and mastering that language, that it, again, affirms us. It gives us a positive sense of ourselves, which begins first with a positive thought of ourselves. So I think this is a very important conversation that I hope that we will continue to have, because I know there's a lot more perspectives out there, a lot more thoughts out there about how we master this language and make it a liberating language.
Indeed. I think the other thing that this has brought up for me, just something to think about, is being more analytical. We can't take things and accept things on face value. We have to be willing to go beneath the surface and go into the depth of a particular topic, a particular phrase, a particular word, and get to the root of it to see what the idea is and the message that is conveying.
I think that's good right there, brother.
Indeed. Well, family, we appreciate you. Loretta A. Walker, we appreciate you for being on with us live. We hope that you found value in this conversation. And until our minds meet again, we'll be back again next week. Peace and blessings, family.